Hi guys, my name is Liza.
And I'm Lavin.
My name is Sylvia.
And I'm Christina.
And today we're going to be doing our presentation on Max Weber. And sorry we couldn't be in class today, but hopefully you guys can enjoy this presentation.
There's going to be a link on Moodle to a handout where you guys will have access to all the key terms and the questions that we're going to be asking in order to facilitate the discussion online.
Enjoy this presentation. Thank you for watching.
Hi guys, I'm Lavin, and today we're going to be presenting on Max Weber, Religion and Culture Interwoven. So who is Max Weber? Maximilian Weber was born in 1864 and died in 1920. He was a German cultural theorist of exceptionally wide learning, which he combined with a keen interest in comparative analysis and conceptual generalization. With Durkheim, he is considered as one of the twin founders of modern academic sociology. He was raised in Berlin and excelled in scholarship from an early age. His father worked for the German parliament, which allowed him to always be surrounded by academics who would have animated debates and informed conversations. He attended the University of Berlin, where he combined studies in economic and social history with training in law. Weber involved himself in the German Methodenstree, sorry, don't mind my pronunciation, a learned scholarly debate over proper methods that raged among historians and economists at the time. In these discussions, he endorsed the principle of understanding, which emphasized the importance of human intentions and actions alongside impersonal structures and forces in explaining historical events. He also stressed the importance of formalized general categories, what he called ideal types, as being critical to comparative historical and sociological thinking. Between 1904 and 1905, he wrote a pair of provocative articles entitled The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, through which he tried to account for a profound change in the attitudes that transformed both the economy and society of the Western world. This provocative argument is known today as the Weber thesis. There is a big difference between Weber's theory and the theories of people such as Freud, Durkheim, and Marx. This is because they explain religious belief by reducing it to something else, some other cause that is more basic and fundamental. Religion is explained as being caused by something more real and more basic. Weber does the complete opposite of reductionist expectation. As you will all see, religious ideas and attitudes will be the causes, and the social and economic changes will be the effects. For Weber, human cultural actions and institutions are inescapably complex and multidimensional. Explaining them requires recourse to multiple interacting causes, conditions, and influences that never move in just one direction. So, what is the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism? Weber argues in this essay that indirectly and unintentionally, religious ideas of two Protestant theologians in the 16th century, Martin Luther and John Calvin, were crucial to the economic revolution that ended the Middle Ages and gave shape to the modern world. The earning of more and more money, combined with strict avoidance of all spontaneous enjoyment of life, thought of so purely that it appears entirely transcendental and absolutely irrational. The ultimate purpose of life is the acquisition of money. This is the leading principle of capitalism, which is also very similar to certain religious ideas. Earning money within modern economic order, as long as it is done legally, is the result and expression of virtue and proficiency in a calling. People should feel that their professional activity is a duty and a calling. The ideal capitalistic entrepreneur gets nothing out of his wealth for himself except the irrational sense of having done his job well. He is modest. To the pre-capitalistic man, something like this is unthinkable, that the purpose of people is to make money. This kind of idea was actually considered wrong. It was only tolerated because people had to make money in order to survive. So, how did it become a calling? What ideas could account for activity apparently directed towards profit alone as a calling towards which the individual feels himself to have an ethical obligation? Luther's concept of a calling. A calling is the central dogma of all Protestant denominations. The only way of living acceptably was to fulfill your obligation in the world. This idea was posed by Martin Luther. According to Luther, labor in a calling appears as an outward expression of brotherly love. Fulfilling worldly duties is the only will of God. Calling is something that man has to accept as a divine ordinance to which he must adapt. Calvin and the Calvinist doctrine of election. It is important to note that the founders of these religious movements did not promote the spirit of capitalism. For them, the salvation of the soul, and that alone, was the center of their life and work. Also, that the Reformation was not the reason for the rise of capitalism. Rather, Weber attempts to look at whether and to what extent religious forces have taken part in the qualitative formation and quantitative expansion of capitalism all over the world. The characteristic dogma of Calvinism was predestination. They replaced the God who is so human and understanding with a God that is beyond the reach of human understanding and who has decided the fate of every individual. During the Reformation, salvation of the soul was the most important thing to people. Calvinism made this impossible to be saved because God had already determined it for you. This meant that one could not attain salvation through the church or sacraments. The elected Christian, this referring to those who have been selected by God for salvation, are only in the world to increase God's glory by fulfilling the commandments of God to the best of their ability. Election and the ethics of worldly asceticism. People do not know if they are a part of the elect. Therefore, all they know is that God has made the decision and can only depend on the implicit trust in Christ, which is the result of true faith. There are two pieces of pastoral advice on predestination. The first one is the absolute duty is to consider oneself chosen and to combat all doubts as temptations of the devil, because lack of self-confidence is the result of insufficient faith. The second, in order to attain that self-confidence, intense worldly activity is recommended as the most suitable means. It and it alone disperses religious doubts and gives the certainty of grace. God works through the elect people, and they are conscious of it. Their actions originate from the faith caused by God's grace. Luther and Calvin have different views on how to be sure of God's grace. According to Luther, one feels like a vessel of the Holy Spirit. According to Calvin, one feels like a tool of divine will. There was an end to institutional asceticism so that people can lead an alert and intelligent life. The most urgent task is the destruction of spontaneous, impulsive enjoyment. The most important means was to bring order to the conduct of its adherents. The elect began to see themselves as a kind of aristocracy, so they were better than everyone else because they were guaranteed salvation. Calvinist asceticism and capitalism. Living ascetically no longer had to only be done in the monasteries or churches anymore, but could take place in daily life. It is important to note that this was being done for the world beyond and not this world. If God offers profitability to an elect, the faithful Christian must take advantage of the opportunity. Making money was a way of knowing if you are an elect Christian. Wealth is only bad if it is Wealth is only bad if it is temptation to idleness and sinful enjoyment of life. And the acquisition of it is bad if the purpose is to live later without care. It is hazardous to spend money that is entrusted in you on your own enjoyment. Money should not be spent on things that do not serve the glory of God. Man has a duty and a responsibility for his possessions. He must hold them undiminished for the glory of God and increase them by restless effort. This had an ethical foundation in Protestantism, and its significance for the development of capitalism is obvious. Protestant asceticism is against spontaneous enjoyment of possessions, especially the consumption of luxuries. It broke the bonds of the impulse of acquisition because it not only legalized it, but looked at it as directly willed by God. The pursuit of wealth is seen as an end in itself, but attaining it in a calling was a sign of God's blessing. Religious valuation of restless, continuous, systematic work in a worldly calling as the highest means to asceticism is the most powerful lever for the expansion of an attitude towards life that was the spirit of capitalism. This idea favored the development of rational bourgeois economic life. It was the most important influence in the development of that life. The bourgeois businessman, as long as he remained in the bounds of correctness, his moral conduct was spotless, and his use of wealth not objectionable, could follow his interests and would feel that he was fulfilling a duty in doing so. The power of religious asceticism gave him good workers who clung to their work as to a life purpose willed by God. He was comfortable with unequal distribution of the goods because it was the special dispensation of divine providence. This later entered capitalistic theories of productivity of low wages. It legalized the exploitation of this specific willingness to work because it interpreted the employer's business activity as a calling. Rational conduct on the basis of the idea of the calling was born from the spirit of Christian asceticism, which is the fundamental element of the spirit of modern capitalism and modern culture. Since asceticism undertook to remodel the world and work out its ideals in the world, material goods have gained increasing power over the lives of people like never before. Capitalism depends on machines and therefore no longer depends on asceticism for support. So basically, this positive attitude towards work and wealth, which exists today, got its ideas from the Protestant ethic. Although it was not the aim of the Protestants, it justified capitalism and gave us some kind of a backbone. Now I have here a quote by Weber, which states, "Specialists without spirit, sensualities without heart. This nullity imagines that it has attained a level of civilization never before achieved." I believe that by this quote here, Weber is talking about the dehumanization of society by capitalism. There is no substance or importance to humanity. Capitalism has pulled people in without an alternative option. Whether you disagree or agree, everyone needs to have a job and work in order to survive. Basically, our society is only based on working and making money, and therefore there is nothing human left within us. So I leave you guys with this question. Weber suggests that the Protestant ethic has been manipulated into capitalism as a way of justifying the modern economic order. Do you agree with Weber about this idea? If so, does this mean that we have become people without substance who only live to work and acquire as much money as we can?
guys, my name is Liza, and I'm going to be covering the section on the sociology of religion. So from the sociological perspective, Weber examines the practitioner of magic, the institutionalized office of the priest, the charismatic figure of religious prophets, and two different types of prophecy. Weber examines the role of cults. He goes into saying that a crucial figure of priesthood is the specialization of particular groups of persons in continuous operation of cultic enterprise, permanently associated with particular norms, places, times, and related to specific social groups. There can be no priesthood without a cult. Magicians wield considerable power, and their essentially magic celebrations may play a central role in life of their people. Yet they lack continuously operative cult, and so the term priest cannot be applied to them. Weber believes there is no radical distinction between a renewer of religion, which is one who preaches an older revelation, and a founder of religion, which is one who claims to bring completely new deliverances. From the perspective of sociology, a prophet is a purely individual bearer of charisma, who by virtue of his mission proclaims a religious doctrine or divine commandment. Weber believes there is no radical distinction between a renewer of religion, which is one who preaches an older revelation, and a founder of religion, one who claims to bring a completely new deliverances. A decisive element distinguishes the prophet from the priest. The priest claims authority by virtue of his service in a sacred tradition, while the prophet's claim is based on personal revelation and charisma. No prophets have emerged from the priestly class. For example, the Indian teachers of salvation were not Brahmins, nor were the Israelite prophets priests. Therefore, no prophet has emerged from the class of priests. Weber also looks into the role of prophet versus priest and the magician. The priest dispenses salvation by virtue of his office. Even in the case in which personal charisma may be involved, it is the hierarchical office that confers legitimate authority upon the priest as a member of an organized enterprise or salvation. The prophet and the magician exert his power simply by virtue of his personal gifts. Unlike the magician, the prophet claims to have definite revelations, and the core of his mission is doctrine or commandment, not magic, which is what separates the two. In order to prove one is prophet, he must validate himself through proof of his possession of any kind of magical acts or any kind of spiritual divinely within him. Weber proposes that the principle of gracious services separates the prophet from the priest. The typical prophet propagates ideas for his own sake and not for feast, at least not in any obvious or regulated forms. The chief reason for the success of prophetic propaganda is the fact that prophets are free of charge, whereas when you go to a church and to a priest, there's usually some type of service where one would have to pay to the church. Weber goes into explaining that there are two main fundamental types of prophecy. The first one is exemplary, which is spelled Exemplary. Sorry, I couldn't say it right. This one involves Asian religions. The prophet, by his personal example, demonstrates to others the way to religious salvation. So he's kind of like the example, and then everybody else kind of just follows his path and how he achieves salvation. And he also received important messages to communicate. They also see God as a supramundane who is personal, wrathful, forgiving, loving, demanding, punishing Lord of creation. It also leads believers away from workday life by seeking salvation through extraordinary and spiritual states and attained through mystical experiences. It's ethical. This one focuses on the regions of Iran and the Middle Eastern religions. It focuses on preaching as one who has received commission from God. He demands obedience as an ethical duty. It is based on experience that serves as an example to others. It also looks at God as a supreme impersonal that is only accessible through contemplation. It also requires the devotee to live in accordance to the will of their God. The world is the path to their redemption. Weber goes into examining the nature of prophetic revelation, which is the world as a meaningful totality. Prophetic revelation involves for both the prophet himself and his followers as a unified view of the world derived from a consciously integrated meaningful attitude toward life. This notion must make an effort to systemize all manifestations of life, that is, to organize particular behavior into the direction of life, regardless of the form it may assume in any individual case. However, there is a conflict between empirical reality and this conception of the world as a meaningful totality, which is based on a religious postulate. It produces the strongest tensions in a man's inner life as well as in his external relation to the world. This problem is by no means dealt with prophecy alone. Priestly wisdom and secular philosophy are somehow also concerned with this issue. Okay, so my part is done. Now Christina is going to continue with my discussion and talk about the social psychology of world religions. So continue on, Christina.
Perfect. Thank you. Today I'm going to discuss in great detail about the social psychology of world religions through Max Weber's own philosophy and mindset. Just to recap what was already mentioned by Liza, Weber looks at two main fundamental types of philosophies, which are exemplary and ethical, which is also known as emissary. The emissary type believe that they have received an important message which must be communicated to others, while the exemplary type base their religious authority on experience that serves as an example to others. Religions grounded in an exemplary prophecy, like Buddhism and Hinduism, lead believers away from workday life by seeking salvation through mystical experiences. While religions based on the emissary type, which is also known as the ethical type, like Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam, require the devout to live in accordance to the will of their God. Seeking mystical union with the cosmos, according to these religions, are understood as extremely irrational, which actually devalue the God-created world. Next, I would like to discuss Weber's idea of virtuoso religiosity and mass religiosity, along with church and sect. Weber begins this section by the sacred values instilled within various religious traditions that are called charisma. Charisma, in this sense, is a divine gift or power that gives an individual influence or authority over a large number of people. Introducing the work of Max Weber, the concept of the religious virtuoso is someone who strives for perfection within an existing religious tradition. The virtuoso strives to fulfill the demands of the religion. Virtuoso religiosity is the complete opposite of charismatic authority and movement, in that the charismatic introduces a new thing, a new gift, however, separating and moving away from the initial religion or group of people. But in contrast to that, the virtuoso religiosity is devoted to embodying the already acknowledged traditions of a specific religious community. However, through continuous practice within virtuoso religiosity, the leader may at times go to such extremes that they are actually unknowingly becoming a charismatic leader. Mass religiosity refers to those who are considered to be unmusical, religiously unmusical. Weber considered himself to also be religiously unmusical, as he stated, and I quote, "It is true that I am absolutely unmusical religiously.
But a thorough self-examination has told me that I'm neither anti-religious nor irreligious. Therefore, being considered unmusical does not mean that you are not religious. To express this, he did not only refer to himself, but also to the general modern layman. Due to the bitterness of the world lived in, had also become religiously unmusical. For Weber, the lack of religious musicality, excitement, and devotion was due to cultural and social situations, which has affected the majority. With that being said, every official authority of a church argues against all virtuoso religion and its self-governing beliefs. As it is stated in the reading, Max Weber explains that a church is a community organized by officials into an institution which bestows gifts of grace, while sect refers to a Christian denomination characterized by insistence on strict qualifications for membership. The church must be a democratic institution in regards to ensuring accessibility to everyone. The nature of the religiosity of virtuosos has been of importance for the development of the way of life of the masses. The virtuoso religiosity has also served as an essential key for the economic ethic of the respective religion. Religious virtuoso is considered to be exemplary and more practical. This means the economy along with their other events in the world have been considered as religiously inferior. Within these religions, there have been a separation between the typical layman and the community of virtuosos. Work, life, and everyday action is considered to be insignificant and is placed completely at the opposite spectrum of religion, so on the two opposite ends. As we regard the distinction between religion and sect, along with virtuoso and religiosity, we simply cannot cluster and combine the various religions into together, as each religion is considered historical with its own individualities and qualities of a highly complex nature. Again, also by using Max Weber's philosophy, the chapter then goes on to explain three forms of religious authority. It expresses that in this context, and according to Weber, the term charisma talks about an amazing quality of a person. The term charismatic authority pertains to a rule or governance over a group of people. This group willingly follows the charismatic leader due to their strong devotion and trust in the specific sacred quality of the person. Various charismatic leaders, like a sorcerer, the prophet, some head rulers of specific parties, etc., are believed to have this rare, extraordinary quality that makes them extremely valuable. Their belief and devotion to a specific individual exists because the great quality that they obtain exceeds the qualities of a normal human individual. The reason as to why many individuals put so much faith and devotion towards a certain person and quality is through the evidence and the confirmation of this quality through its miracles, victories, and other successes that pertain specifically to the followers. However, being this type of religious authority figure is risky because the devotion and belief die out rather quickly. The moment followers begin to lose faith in the quality and the person due to the lack of proof and the lack of magical powers, then the group or organization quickly falls to pieces. Charismatic authority is considered to be irrational, as it is non-traditional nor rational. It does not follow general norms, and it is not tied down to a specific clear-cut way of living. But in contrast, it is seen as revolutionary, and it is often changed and tweaked in order to best adhere to his or her followers. The next type of religious authority figure mentioned is traditionalism authority. Traditionalism authority is the habitual attitude and belief that an everyday routine is essential and unchangeable. Within this authority, routine and structure is key, and change is rarely type of religious authority figure mentioned is the traditionalism authority. Traditionalism refers to the habitual attitude and belief that an everyday routine is essential and unchangeable. Within the authority, routine and structure is key and change is rarely to never looked upon. Traditional authority emphasizes and puts an importance on traditions and habits in order to control human behavior and to easily identify the right from the wrong. The next type of religious authority figure mentioned is traditionalism authority. Traditionalism refers to the habitual attitude and belief that an everyday routine is essential and unchangeable. Within this authority, routine and structure is key, and change is rarely to never looked upon. Traditional authority emphasizes and puts an importance on traditions and habits in order to control human behavior, to easily identify the right from the wrong, and also to ensure stability amongst the group. According to Weber, traditions and practices that have been passed by generation is assumed to be the way things have to be, either because they have always worked or because they are consecrated and sacred by higher powers in the past. Patriarchalism is the most important within traditionalism. This term is defined as the authority of the father, the husband, the senior of the house, etc. You could find that on page 225. Basically, it means an authoritative male governing and controlling a union of followers like families, societies, countries, etc. The third form is called rationalized and legal authority. This form of authority has been present throughout history. However, it has become evidently used and practiced mainly throughout the modern era. The one form of rationalized authority is bureaucracy. Max Weber argued that bureaucracy creates the most rational way that we can organize and manage human activity, and that systematic processes and organized hierarchies are essential in order to achieve order. But Weber also explains that unregulated bureaucracy can serve as a threat to individual freedom, meaning that if too much control and rules are implemented amongst the people, they will begin to lose their own personal freedom to make their own individual choices. Weber concludes this section by stating that, and I quote, that within legal authority, submission is not based upon the belief and the devotion towards charismatically gifted people like prophets or heroes or upon sacred tradition, but rather, under legal authority, it is based upon an impersonal bond to the defined and functional duty of office. Weber concludes this section by stating, and I quote, that within legal authority, submission is not based upon the belief and devotion towards charismatically gifted people like prophets, heroes, or upon sacred traditions, but rather, submission over legal authority is based upon an impersonal bond to the defined functional duty of office, which is also the group of people who are in control. The official duty is fixed by the rational norms and regulations. Weber described that these three types of authority as legitimate, meaning that they are accepted as creating binding requirements and responsibilities on the part of others. Now I'm going to pass it on to Sylvia, who's going to discuss religious rejections of the world and their direction.
Moving on to the last section of this chapter called Religious Rejections of the World and Their Direction. Here Weber details a differential relationship between these ideal types such as asceticism versus mysticism, as well as the various value spheres of modern society. Before I begin, I wanted to start off with the two important terms that were repeatedly used in the chapter. Such terms are asceticism and mysticism. This whole chapter, Weber converges on a very specific understanding of personal religious experiences and how Weber's rigid typological distinction between asceticism and mysticism leads him to diverge in his understanding of the significance of such experiences. For Weber, he did not offer a definition of asceticism, but he did provide a contrast between the polar concepts of the ascetic and the mystic. In keeping with his methodological intention of studying religion as a particular type of social action, from asceticism by the divergent practical effect each has on human action. Weber is concerned primarily with asceticism in its active, inner-worldly form, in which the believer seeks to tame what is creatural and wicked through work and a worldly creation of God, whose power comes to expression in it despite its creatureliness, provides the only medium through which one is unique. The category of mysticism captures a very different self-understanding of one's relationship to the world and to God. As Weber concisely conveys it, mysticism intends a state of possession, not action, and the individual is not a tool but a vessel toward the quest to achieve rest in God and in Him alone. He means that to such an extent that he is done through action, the mystic proves himself against the world, against his action to be enjoyed as a possession of, or human affairs are perceived as a distraction from or worth a prideful affront to the divine. Thus, in a marvelous turn of phrase, Weber characterizes the standard mystical attitude as one of a specifically broken humility, a minimization of action. Weber stresses on the term true mystic. This means that the creature must be silent so that God may speak. In other words, by providing himself against the world, against his action in the world. He stresses upon the religiousness of those groups come true within institutional structure of the world and towards them. In this case, the world is seen as a duty to transform the reality in accordance with the ideal of asceticism and strive to make the world fulfill religious demands. Only this way can individuals demonstrate and prove their religious status. Moving on to the direction of the abnegation of the world. This section of the chapter discusses the following. It's about the tension existing between religion and the world. In fact, it's between religion and the world. Weber argues, it is important to put the follower into a permanent state, which makes him inwardly safe against suffering. The tension has also been the greater, the more rational in principle the ethic has been, and the more it has been oriented to inward sacred values as means of salvation. Weber argues that tension has been the greater, the more religion has been sublimated from ritualism and towards religious absolutionism. Weber stresses on the different spheres of life, drift into tension when, quite generally, from the development of inner and other worldly values toward rationality, towards conscious endeavor, and towards sublimation by knowledge. According to the new community, the prophetic religion has developed a religious ethic of brotherliness. As Weber said, the religion of brotherliness has always clashed with the orders and values of the world. Weber also talks about the directions of the abnegation of the world. This section of the chapter discusses the following. The tension existing between religion and the world. In fact, the tension is between religion and the world. Weber argues, it is important to put the follower into a permanent state, which makes him inwardly safe against suffering. The tension has also been the greater, the more rational in principle the ethic has been, and the more it has been oriented to inward sacred values as means of salvation. Weber argues that tension has been the greater, the more religion has been sublimated from ritualism and towards religious absolutionism. Weber stresses on the different spheres of life drift into tension, when quite generally from the development of inner and other worldly values toward rationality, towards conscious endeavor, and towards sublimation by knowledge. According to the new community, the prophetic religion has developed a religious ethic of brotherliness. As Weber said, the religion of brotherliness has always clashed with the orders and values of this world, and the more consistently its demands have been carried through, the sharper the clash has been. Rational asceticism itself has created the very wealth it rejected. As a religion of virtuosis, pure naturalism renounced the universalism of love and rationally routinized all work in this world into serving God's will and testing one's state of grace. God's will, in its ultimate meaning, was quite incomprehensible, yet it was the only positive will that could be known. Not only was the tension between religion and the world, but it was also about politics and economics. According to Weber, in politics, as in economics, the more rational the political order became, the sharper the problems of these tensions became. So from politics becomes war, and from war becomes a sense of community, and so by their differences, the symbolic meaning given by religion. As economic and rational political actions follow laws of their own, so every other rational action within the world remains inescapably bound to worldly conditions. Weber further goes on to talk about the economic sphere. For Weber, what we call social stratification, social class, or social inequality is in the sphere of power and can be analyzed by examining economic situation, status, honor, or party, organizations formed by people to achieve certain ends. In the section of economy and society of this chapter, Weber was concerned with the distribution of power. Thus, Weber begins his analysis of class, status, and party. Weber's definition of power is as follows. In general, we understand by power the chance of a man or of a number of men to realize their own will in a communal action, even against the resistance of others who are participating in the same action. The social group and classes are in the same sphere of power and are connected to the distribution of power. Given that there are various ways that power can be exercised, for Weber, it is not possible to reduce the organization of all these groups to a single dimension or factor, such as ownership or non-ownership of the means of production. Rather, for Weber, there is pluralism associated with class structure, in that people attempt to achieve ends using various means. Each of these may create a grouping, such as class, status, group, or party. Weber argued that no genuine religion of salvation has overcome the tension between the religiosity and a rational economy. The ethic of religious tension is because of the rejection possession of economic goods. An example of religion and the economic sphere, as explained in this chapter, would be such as monks would remove themselves from individual property. Its existence has rested entirely upon his own work. The tension here is that seclusion from the world. Monks in this case must enjoy only what nature has, and men voluntarily offer, such as berries, roots, and free alms. And so the labor here is that the labor distracts the monk from concentration upon contemplative value of salvation. Weber lastly discusses the two avenues escaping tension between religion and economic world. Vocation is one which is serving God's will and testing one's state of grace, and the second one is mysticism, mystic benevolence. The tension with mysticism is that it is not interested in his person. So to conclude the whole chapter, I want to give you guys a whole summary of what we learned and what I hope you guys learned from this presentation. Max Weber overall perspective is on religion. However, he offers us a different vision, one in which religion can in some instances be an independent variable and as such a source of social change. He discusses the spirit of capitalism. According to Weber, he considers exemplary of his spirit in its pursuit, ideal, typical form. At the core of the spirit of capitalism is a work ethic in which any time spent not actually making money is wasted time. Weber identifies the spirit of capitalism is not in the form of business practice, but as an ethic. It is this ethic, claims Weber, that is specific to modern Western capitalism, and it is based on Luther's idea of the calling or vocation. The key to precursors to modern capitalism, according to Weber, is that the popularization of the idea of the calling has drawn religious life out of monastery and planted it in the world. According to Weber, it is a motivation for strenuous capitalist development that involves reinvesting the fruits of one's labor. Weber finds this motivation in the Calvinist doctrine of predestination. It stated the following: A. The elect are saved and everyone else is damned. B. God has selected the chosen even before their birth, and humanity has no way of knowing who will be saved. And C. The salvation could not be earned, for it could be humanity would have a kind of power over God. At the core of Weber's argument is a sense of helplessness and loneliness that he claimed the Calvinists must have felt. The Calvinists think Weber would have found this worry psychologically unbearable and would have needed to find a way of knowing that he was saved. Weber tied this Calvinist strategy to the Lutheran devotion of one's life calling, which could take place in the business world, and claimed that this combination of worldliness and ascetic discipline was pivotal for the development of modern capitalism. Weber posits four general approaches to salvation. He uses terms like escape, otherworldly, and innerworldly. One can either escape from the world or find means of adjusting to it. Weber terms the escape approach otherworldly, and adjustment as innerworldly. Weber then turns his attention to whether one practices resignation, which is the mysticism, or self-mastery, which is the asceticism, in regard to the world's temptation. To finally conclude the summary of this chapter, Weber's interest in social change has also led him to be interested in the issue of religious leadership, since social change requires leaders for the motivation and the direction of action. Before I close up the summary, I wanted to leave you guys with the last discussion question. The question is, throughout the chapter, Weber touches base on religiosity, secularization, and social solidarity. The contemporary patterns of belief which shows high levels of religiosity set aside low levels of participation in religious organizations that offer spiritual and emotional fulfillment. In your opinion, what role can they play at the level of the social?
Max Weber is one of the philosophers best able to explain to us the peculiar economic system we live within called capitalism. Born in Erfurt in Germany in 1864, Weber grew up to see his country convulsed by the dramatic changes of the Industrial Revolution. Cities were exploding in size, vast companies were forming, a new managerial elite was replacing the old aristocracy. Weber spent his life analysing these changes, and he developed some key ideas with which we can better understand the workings and future of capitalism. The standard view is that capitalism began as a result of developments in technology, especially steam power. But Weber proposed something more interesting, that what actually made capitalism possible was a set of ideas, and in particular religious ideas. And not just any religious ideas. Capitalism was created by Protestantism, specifically Calvinism. In his great work, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, published in 1905, Weber laid out some of the reasons why he believed Protestant Christianity had been so crucial to capitalism. In Weber's analysis, Catholics have it relatively easy. They're able to confess their transgressions at regular intervals and can be cleansed by priests. But no such purifications are available to Protestants, who believe that only God is able to forgive anyone, and he won't make his intentions known until the day of judgment. Until then, Weber alleged, Protestants are left with heightened feelings of anxiety, as well as lifelong guilty desires to prove their virtue to a severe, all-seeing, but silent God. In Weber's eyes, Protestant feelings of guilt were diverted into an obsession with hard work. This was what he called the Protestant work ethic. The sins of Adam could only be expunged through constant toil. Not coincidentally, there were far fewer festivals and days of rest in Protestantism. God didn't like time off. Catholics had limited their conception of holy work to the activities of priests, monks and nuns. But now Protestants declared that work of any kind could be done in the name of God, even jobs like being a baker or an accountant. This lent new moral energy and earnestness to all branches of professional life. In Catholic countries, the family was, and often still is, everything. But Protestants took a less benevolent view of family. The family could be a haven for selfish and egoistic motives. For early Protestants, one was meant to direct one's selfless energies to the community as a whole, the public realm, where everyone deserved fairness and dignity. Protestantism and eventually scientific capitalism turned its back on miracles. Weber called this the disenchantment of the world. So prosperity wasn't to be thought of as something mysteriously ordained by God. It could only be the result of thinking methodically, acting honestly, and working industriously and sensibly over many years. Without a belief in miracles, people turned to science for explanations and changes, which encouraged scientific investigation and discovery, and eventually technological booms. Taken together, these 5 factors created in Weber's eyes the crucial catalytic ingredients for capitalism to take hold. Marx had argued that religion was the opium of the masses, a drug that induced passive acceptance of the horrors of capitalism. But Weber turned this dictum on its head. People didn't tolerate capitalism because of religion. They only became capitalists as a result of their religion. There are about 35 countries where capitalism is now well developed. It probably works best in Germany, where Weber first observed it. But in the remaining 161 nations, it arguably isn't working very well at all. This is a source of much puzzlement and distress. Billions of dollars in aid are transferred every year from the rich to the poor parts of the world. But a Weberian analysis tells us that these materialist interventions will never work, because the problem isn't really a material one to begin with. Instead, certain countries for Weber fail to succeed at capitalism because they don't feel anxious and guilty enough. They trust too much in miracles. They like to celebrate now rather than invest in tomorrow. And their members feel it's acceptable to steal from the community in order to enrich their families, favouring the clan over the nation. Today, Weber would counsel those who wish to spread capitalism to concentrate on our equivalent of religion, culture. It's a nation's attitudes, hopes, and a sense of what life is about that produces an economy that either flourishes or flounders. To reduce poverty, Weber would say, one has to start at the level of ideas. What the World Bank and the IMF should be giving sub-Saharan Africa is not, in a Weberian analysis, money and technology, but a new outlook. The decisive question for an economy should not be what the rate of inflation is, but what's on TV tonight. Weber was writing in an age of revolution. He too wanted things to change, but he believed that one first had to work out how political power operated. Weber believed that humanity had gone through 3 distinct types of power. The older societies operated according to what he called traditional authority, where kings relied on folklore and divinity to justify their power. Then came the age of charismatic authority, where a heroic individual, most famously Napoleon, could rise to power with a magnetic personality and change everything through passion and will. However, Weber explained that we had now entered a 3rd age of bureaucratic authority. Bureaucracy achieves its power via knowledge. Only the bureaucrats know how stuff works, and it will take an outsider years to work it out. Most of us simply give up, usefully for the powers that be. The dominance of bureaucracy has major implications for anyone trying to change a nation. There is often an understandable but misguided desire to think that one just has to change the leader. But in fact, removing a leader almost never has the degree of impact that is hoped for. If we're to get things to go better, much of it will have to come through outwardly rather undramatic, bureaucratic processes. It will come through the marshalling of statistical evidence, patient briefings to ministers, testimonies to committee hearings, and a minute study of budgets. Weber tells us how power works now and reminds us that ideas may be far more important than tools or money in changing nations. It's a hugely significant thesis. With Weber's guidance, we learn that so much which we associate with vast, impersonal, external forces is in fact dependent upon something utterly intimate and perhaps more malleable, the thoughts in our own heads.
All right, so that sums up our presentation. Thank you guys for listening. Hope you guys enjoyed it.
Again, don't forget, if you guys need access to the questions, there's the link on Moodle where you can access the questions, again, in the key terms. Hope you enjoyed our presentation, and we will talk to you on Moodle.
Bye.